She never expected that serving coffee and toast could change her life forever. Every morning, before the sun even broke the horizon, she tied her apron, put on her brightest smile, and stepped into the little diner on the corner of Maple Street, a place where time stood still, and so did people's opinions. To most customers, she was invisible, just the help. But to one old man who always sat by the window, she was something else entirely. He greeted her with a nod, left exact change, and never said much. Yet there was something strange about him, something heavy. The way he watched her, not with disrespect but with guilt, like a man haunted by a past he could never outrun. Weeks turned into months. She kept serving him day after day, through the whispers, the stares, and the quiet discrimination that clung to her like the scent of coffee and grease. Still, she smiled. Still, she showed kindness, even when the world didn't show it back. Then one morning, he didn't show up. Instead, 4 men in suits walked in, tall, serious, carrying something more than just presents. The diner went silent. Their eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. Behind them, another figure appeared, a lawyer holding a briefcase, and in that moment, her hands froze over the counter. Because the man they mentioned was him. She didn't know it yet. But the truth that was about to unfold would turn her entire life and the town's history upside down. The man she had served with kindness wasn't just another customer. He was the reason her family's past was written in pain. And now, his final act was going to expose everything this town had tried to bury. Why did his lawyers come for her? And what secret could be powerful enough to bring bodyguards into a small-town diner? This is the story of how one woman's kindness uncovered a truth that money, power, and prejudice could never hide. It started like any other morning. The kind of morning where life feels predictable, safe, ordinary, almost invisible. The hum of the coffee machine filled the small diner before the first customer even arrived. The smell of buttered toast and brewed coffee mixed with the faint buzz of an old radio humming in the background. For Amara, this was her world, a modest life held together by quiet resilience. She worked double shifts, smiled through exhaustion, and carried a heart that had learned to forgive what others never noticed. The subtle stares, the whispers behind menus, the tips that were forgotten more often than not. Yet every day she showed up, because that's what she'd been taught, that dignity wasn't in being noticed, but in never giving up. The regulars came in like clockwork, retirees reading newspapers, truck drivers passing through, and townsfolk who'd known each other their whole lives. They talked about weather, football, and gas prices. Anything but race. It wasn't that they didn't see it. It was that they pretended not to. In a town like this, silence was its own kind of truth. Then there was him, the old man with the gray hat and quiet eyes, always sitting by the same window seat, watching the world go by. He never said much, just ordered black coffee and whole wheat toast. But Amara noticed things others didn't, the tremor in his hands, the way he hesitated before speaking, and how sometimes he seemed like he wanted to say something but couldn't. For months, they shared the same unspoken routine, her kindness, his silence. Until one day, she found an old photograph wedged beneath the table where he always sat. It was faded, nearly torn, but what caught her breath wasn't the age of the picture. It was the faces in it. One of them looked like her grandfather. That moment changed everything, because suddenly, this diner, her place of safety and rhythm, didn't feel so ordinary anymore. Something in her gut told her that the past she thought she'd escaped was quietly sitting across from her every morning, drinking coffee and hiding a truth she wasn't ready to face, and soon, that truth would come knocking at her door, wearing suits, carrying papers, and guarded by men who didn't smile. The photograph would not leave her alone. It rode home with Amara in the pocket of her apron, a thin, faded square that felt heavier than a wallet full of coins. She could not explain why her pulse quickened whenever she looked at it, why the dust-soft faces seemed to breathe whenever she traced them with her thumb. She told herself the likeness to her grandfather was coincidence. She told herself people share cheekbones, share shadows, share smiles. She told herself she was imagining it. She slept with the photograph under her pillow that night anyway. Morning brought routine and the comfort of work, but routine felt different now. Every clink of a cup sounded like a tapping on a grave. Every scrape of a chair reminded her of something being dragged from the past into daylight. The diner's bell announced the regulars, and Amara drifted through the room with practiced care, setting plates, refilling mugs, exchanging quiet pleasantries without asking for any back. She had learned long ago that she would not always receive what she gave. She offered dignity because it was hers to give, no matter how the world behaved. The old man was there, by the window, hat low, eyes steady. He ate slowly, like he wanted time to lengthen. She noticed the tremor again when he lifted his cup. She noticed the way he looked at the door before he looked at her, like he was measuring exits, like he was choosing when, not if, to leave forever. It unsettled her. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to pretend he was just another customer and she was just another waitress. Both things were true and neither was. The photograph burned in her pocket. She tucked it back into the safe place inside her apron and convinced herself not to bring it up. She did not know whether the question living on her tongue would open a door or drop a match. Some questions were dangerous, especially in this town, especially from someone like her. She had learned this in school hallways, in grocery lines, in job interviews. There were rooms she could enter as long as she pretended not to see the walls. The whispers began 2 days later. They traveled faster than the smell of bacon, faster than coffee could be poured. A regular with a loud voice and a louder certainty commented on the old man's table like it was a tourist attraction. Another squinted at Amara like she had stolen something he could not name. Someone else, younger, watched with curiosity rather than malice, but curiosity could be cruel too. This was how the town worked. It pretended to be uninterested while memorizing everything. Amara kept working, but the air felt thicker. She felt eyes move with her tray. She felt how the tips thinned when she lingered near the old man. She felt the shift in tone when her hand brushed his table, something between suspicion and accusation. Kindness looked suspicious when it crossed invisible lines the town refused to admit existed. At home, her mother recognized the photograph before Amara finished explaining where she had found it. Recognition moved across her mother's face like a storm. There was fear there and grief, and the quiet calculation of someone deciding whether truth would protect or destroy. Her mother folded the picture into her palm without looking at it a second time, and told Amara that some things were better left where they were buried. Then her mother kissed her forehead longer than usual, as if that kiss could be armor. Armor did not stop memory. It only muffled it. Amara dreamed of the window seat, the old man's hat, the slow motion of his hands. She dreamed of her grandfather's voice, a voice she had not heard since she was a child, a voice that smelled like liniment and wood shavings. He spoke no words. He simply looked at her the way the old man did, steady and burdened. She woke with the sense that two histories had found the same room. The diner offered no distractions the next day. The regulars were sharper, their glances like small knives that wanted to see if they could cut without drawing blood. A young couple posted a photo of the diner to their social page with a caption that pretended to be harmless. Harmless captions are often the most dangerous because the harm they invite arrives smiling. Before lunch, comments appeared. Someone asked why she was always at his table. Someone else suggested she was angling for something. Another pretended to defend her while suggesting there was surely more to the story. Every comment felt like a stranger entering her kitchen without knocking. In the afternoon, the old man left an envelope under his saucer. It was thin and cream-colored, sealed with a shaky hand. He did not look at her when he left. He did not tiptoe, did not hurry, did not do anything that would have told the room that something unusual had just happened. He simply disappeared into the bright winter air. In the envelope, Amara found a newspaper clipping folded 3 times and a slip of paper with a phone number. The clipping was brittle, its edges browned. The headline was short, clinical, unsparing. It mentioned a fire. It mentioned an address on the wrong side of town. It mentioned a family name she knew. It did not mention the why. It did not mention the crowd. It did not mention how quickly official words can erase what really happened. Amara stared at the address until the letters distorted. She could hear her grandmother's warning in the back of her mind, the one delivered without rancor, the one that lived like a small stone in every story. Be careful what you stir. The past is not dead. It is ash that still burns. Ash lives in the seams of things. Ash sits on the shoulder, patient and loyal, ready to rise when someone breathes too deeply. She breathed anyway. The next morning, a car idled across the street longer than usual. She saw it through the diner's steamed-up window, a gray sedan that did not belong to anyone she recognized. It seemed to be watching the door. When she stepped outside to shake crumbs from a tablecloth, the car eased forward, slow and smooth, then blended into traffic as if it had never been there. It left a feeling behind, a trace like the scent of something electrical. She told herself she was being dramatic. Then she told herself to listen to the feeling. She called the number in the envelope that night from her kitchen table. The photograph and the clipping side by side like two pieces of a puzzle that might be the same picture or might not. There was no answer, only a recorded voice that said the mailbox was full. She tried again the next day and the next. The phone did not ring. It simply refused her. Rejection is not always loud. Sometimes it is a steady no that makes you doubt your ears. At the diner, the manager warned her that some customers had complained. The manager did not say what they had complained about. The manager did not need to. Amara understood that the complaints were not about the speed of service. They were not about the coffee being too strong. The complaints were about where she stood, about who sat in her section, about where kindness should be allowed to rest. The manager told her to keep doing a good job. The manager told her to avoid trouble. The manager's voice had the tone of someone trying to balance plates on a windy day. Trouble found her. Anyway, a table of 3 men laughed, too loudly when she refilled their water and asked whether the diner had a policy about who could sit where. The question wore a grin and a joke outfit. Underneath was a map with lines she was expected to see and obey. She kept her hands steady and moved on. A woman who prided herself on charity left an opinion in the tip line instead of money. Another regular began paying in coins only, stacking them in tidy towers that looked generous until she counted them and found the totals were always a little short. Small cruelties collected like lint. They were not always large enough to justify a scene. They were large enough to bruise. Amara's brother told her to quit. He did not say it out of fear. He said it out of anger, a practical anger that had years of practice. Their mother told them both to change the subject. She did not believe in battles that started at the dinner table. She had survived too many to want more. Then the old man missed a day. He had never missed a day. Not in months. The window seat sat empty, the morning light falling across it like an apology. Amara watched the door all morning. She told herself he had a doctor's appointment. She told herself he was traveling. She told herself she did not care. She cared. The gray sedan returned that afternoon, idling again across the street as if it had been assigned the job of pretending coincidence. Later, as she walked to the bus stop, it followed at a polite distance, then turned away when she turned her head. Her shoulders tightened. She moved faster. The bus arrived late and felt like a favor. The envelope had a second clipping. This one appeared at her locker in the back room, slipped under the door without a stamp, without a note. It was another article from decades ago, another clinical description that did not match the stories her grandmother had told in a voice that had to keep itself from shaking. It mentioned a bank. It mentioned foreclosures that came in a wave. It mentioned signatures that appeared quickly on lines that erased people. The article used words like policy and risk, words that wore suits, words that could turn a neighborhood into an equation. It mentioned a branch manager by name. The name was his. Amara sat on a milk crate and read the clipping until her stomach turned. The room around her shrank. The sounds of the diner blurred. She saw her grandfather's hands in wood shavings again, remembered his gentle stubbornness, remembered the day the family had to move because the house no longer belonged to them, remembered the way grown-ups turned quiet so children would not learn the shape of helplessness too early. She remembered how helplessness teaches itself anyway. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It contained an address and a time, nothing more. The address belonged to a law office downtown that she had never entered, the kind of building where the lobby smells like paper and polished wood, and the air itself speaks softly. She did not reply. She saved the message. She told herself not to go. She did not trust the part of herself that wanted to. Tension found new ways to live in her body that week. Her shoulders refused to relax. Her sleep broke into pieces that did not fit back together. At the diner, someone slipped a printed photo onto the bulletin board. It was a cropped image of her pouring coffee at the old man's table, captured from across the room, grainy with a harsh flash. Underneath, someone had typed a caption in bold letters, pretending to ask a question while stating an answer. The manager tore it down fast. The removal did not undo its work. The picture had already been seen. Amara walked home different after that. Alert without looking alert, scanning windows without turning her head, choosing routes that avoided the loud corners and the blind alleys. She had always known how to move through this town carefully. Now careful felt inadequate, a thin coat in sleet. She did not want to give fear the satisfaction of rearranging her life. Fear rearranged things anyway, subtly at first, then with confidence. 2 days before the appointment time in the text message, a patrol car slowed beside her as she crossed an intersection on the light. Its window eased down only enough for her to see the eyes inside. They watched her with the examination of someone verifying a label. The car kept moving. The label remained. She carried it with her like a stamp. The old man returned on a Wednesday. He looked smaller, as if something had been taken from him that bones could feel. He did not stay long. He drank half a cup and left exact change again. When he stood, his hat slipped, and she saw a scar near his temple, thin and pale like an old river. He shook as he placed a folded scrap of stationery on the table. She waited until he left before unfolding it. The handwriting was careful. The message was short. It said that he was sorry for the envelope taking so long to arrive where it belonged. It said that the past does not end on its own. Someone has to decide. Decide what, she wondered. Decide who is forgiven? Decide who pays? Decide who gets to keep keys? The law office smelled like her imagination foretold, paper, polish, and a hint of something expensive that had no name. She entered on her day off wearing the only blazer she owned, one that fit almost but not quite, carrying a small purse with more hope than proof. The receptionist looked at her politely with the kind of politeness that measures. A man in a crisp suit approached, introduced himself without warmth or rudeness, and guided her to a conference room where the blinds were half closed. He spoke carefully about confidentiality, about respect, about how sensitive matters can find closure when handled with discretion. He referred to the old man as his client. He referred to the past as complex. Amara listened and felt both present and absent, as if she were watching another woman in a similar blazer follow the same careful words down a hallway that might be a trap or a bridge. The lawyer presented a document that described a trust. He spoke of revisions. He spoke of an intent to make things right. He asked questions that wore soft shoes. He hinted at property. He hinted at harm. He never said the words she needed him to say. That what happened to her family had been theft wearing paperwork. That the old man had been part of the machine that took and took while pretending to be neutral. He asked her to sign that she had been informed of nothing yet. He asked her to consider attending a meeting the following week where more details would be shared. He used phrases like preliminary notification and potential beneficiary and historical review. He used these phrases like gauze. She left the office with a folder that felt heavier than it should, a promise that was not a promise, and the awareness that none of this would be simple. The town had a way of making rightness feel dangerous, especially when the rightness threatened the way stories had been told. She could already hear how some people would speak if this ever became public. They would call generosity what was actually accountability. They would demand gratitude where contrition was owed. The diner grew more tense with each passing day. The gray sedan appeared more often, sometimes with someone in the driver's seat, sometimes empty, as if the car itself were a watcher. A customer in a union jacket left more than the bill required and told her, without quite telling her, that not everyone in town agreed with the way things were. Another customer folded a pamphlet about neighborhood safety and made sure she saw it. The pamphlet pretended to be about crime. The pamphlet was about control. A storm rolled through on Saturday, the kind that makes the streetlights look lonely. Amara stayed late to help close. As she mopped near the window, she noticed footprints on the outside ledge, the pattern of a boot print stamped into the thin layer of rain-washed dust. She told herself it meant nothing. Then she told herself to stop telling herself that. Her mother confessed what she had been keeping when the storm knocked out the apartment's power and they ate by candlelight. The confession was not a dramatic unveiling. It was a slow release, a piece-by-piece laying down of stones. The family had lost their house when Amara's mother was a girl. The bank had explained the necessity with the confidence of a doctor delivering a diagnosis from a chart that never recorded symptoms. The men who arrived with papers spoke kindly. The men who came later to change locks did not speak at all. The branch manager had visited once, a quick visit that looked like kindness if you did not know how guilt can sometimes dress. Her grandfather had never forgiven himself for trusting anyone who arrived with a handshake. The branch manager's name matched the one in the clipping. Amara's chest tightened with recognition and anger, a twin heat that left no room for breath. She understood then why the old man's eyes looked like confession trapped in a body. She understood that time had not moved as far as the calendar claimed. The past lived in her kitchen, in the way their building manager treated maintenance requests, in the way police cars crawled past slowly some nights, in the way the diner's best tables were carefully assigned without anyone saying why. Amara decided not to attend the meeting. The decision settled in her like a stone set into a foundation. She would not be summoned to a table where the rules were not hers. She would not sign anything that translated harm into legal fog. If the old man wanted to be accountable, he could be, but she would not carry his shame on her back to make it easier for him to set it down. She would live her life, work her shifts, keep her dignity, and choose her battles. The next morning, the gray sedan was already outside when she woke. She took the long route to the bus anyway, weaving through streets where she knew who sat on which porches and what time the mail arrived. She passed the mural where children had painted a city full of smiling people with different shades of skin holding hands around a sun. The mural had a new scrape across it, a diagonal scar that cut through two of the painted hands. She paused, pressed her palm to the cold wall, and kept walking. At the diner, every chair felt occupied even when empty. Eyes claimed spaces the way plates did. The bell at the door rang with a sharper edge, as if metal had learned to worry. The manager hovered. The cook stayed quieter than usual. Around mid-morning, the door opened in a way that the room seemed to sense before it heard. Two men in suits entered first, moving with the orderliness of people who are used to being centered by rooms. They scanned without appearing to scan. Another two followed behind them, broader, the kind of broadness that belongs to people who spend parts of their day deciding where to stand so others can pass. Their jackets fell just loose enough to suggest what they hid. The diner fell into a silence that was not empty but packed. Amara's hands tightened around a tray until its edge pressed into her skin. She set it down carefully and felt the room tilt. The manager straightened. A regular coughed and then remembered he did not need to cough. Amara's body told her to find a door. Her dignity told her to stay where she was. The last man entered carrying a briefcase that looked like it could cut bread. He was older than the first two and younger than the old man. He wore apology without wearing regret. He scanned the room and his eyes found her with a directness that felt like a hand on the shoulder. He moved toward her. The other men widened the path. The room watched with hunger. Amara felt everything slow down. The clock, the breath in her lungs, the drip from the coffee pot that had always seemed to fall faster when she needed to move. She wondered if the old man was alive. She wondered if this was an ambush dressed as civility. She wondered whether anyone would help her if help became necessary. She realized that help was a word that changed meaning depending on who said it and who needed it. The lawyer stopped at the counter. The bodyguards arranged themselves the way furniture does when a room is being set for a meeting no one asked for. The suits at the door closed it gently, and the bell made a sound that struck her as strange, like laughter swallowed before it could leave the mouth. The lawyer opened the briefcase and removed a stack of folders with tabs. He placed one on the counter with respect, as if the counter were an altar. Amara looked at the folder and did not touch it. The lawyer began to speak, not with volume, but with a certainty that assumed the right to be heard. He spoke of a client who valued her kindness. He spoke of decisions made and decisions undone. He spoke of a legacy that needed direction and a matter that required her acknowledgement. He used her full name. He used it like a key. The room leaned closer in the way rooms can without moving a muscle. Amara felt the floor under her feet, solid and insufficient. She knew the town would tell this scene in 100 versions before lunch, each version a little different, each shaped by what the teller wished were true. She knew that whatever this man said next would alter the story she had been living, not because truth could finally breathe, but because power had chosen a moment to pretend it cared about truth. She thought of the photograph wedged beneath the old man's table, of the scar near his temple, of the papers that once changed the life of her family without a single apology. She thought of a fire described like weather, of ash that still lived under her fingernails, of children's painted hands on a wall scratched by someone who needed to scratch something. She did not know what the lawyer would place in front of her next, an apology written in money, a confession written in legalese, a trap wearing the mask of reparation. She only knew that the room had reached the edge of something, and that edges are where people are pushed or choose to leap. The lawyer lifted another folder from the briefcase. Thicker than the last, its tab marked with a date that made her knees soften. It was the date of the night her family had lost their house. He slid it toward her. The bell on the door trembled from a gust, and somewhere in the kitchen a pan clanged like a warning. Amara steadied herself, felt the weight of her mother's kiss, her brother's anger, her grandfather's quiet, the old man's trembling hands, the gray sedan, the whispers, the coins stacked like disrespect, the ash that still burned. She reached toward the folder, and that was the moment the door opened again, and a fifth figure stepped into the diner with a face Amara recognized from the worst invisible chapter of the town's history. Someone who should not have had anything to do with her story now, someone whose presence meant this was not only about guilt or money or even the dead man's conscience. It was about the town itself. It was about what had been done in its name. It was about what would be demanded next. The diner had never been this quiet. Not when storms rattled its old glass windows, not even when power outages left it lit only by flashlights and nervous laughter. But this silence was different. Not empty, but full, like a held breath stretched to breaking. The 4 bodyguards stood by the door, dark suits rigid as walls. The lawyer placed his briefcase on the counter as if it were an offering. Every customer froze, forks halfway to mouths, conversations chopped mid-word. Even the ceiling fan seemed to slow down, slicing the air in uneasy rhythm. Amara stood behind the counter, the smell of burnt toast lingering in the air, her palms damp. Her apron felt suddenly too tight. Her heart thudded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. The lawyer adjusted his tie, eyes steady. "Miss Amara," he began, voice smooth as polished stone. "We've been looking for you." A murmur rippled through the room, the kind that said this is about to be something. He didn't lower his voice. "My client passed away 2 nights ago. He left instructions for us to deliver certain materials to you personally. It is delicate." The words hit her like cold wind. "Passed away? The old man? The one who always sat by the window and nodded, silent but kind." Her knees weakened, but she gripped the counter to steady herself. The lawyer's hand motioned, and one of the men placed a thick brown envelope on the counter. Everyone's eyes locked on it, a sealed mystery wrapped in paper. Amara wanted to ask why her, but her throat tightened before sound could escape. "Inside," the lawyer said, "is your name on a property transfer deed, a trust fund, and several documents of historical importance." He paused, measuring the air. "You are, in short, his primary beneficiary." The silence cracked open. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. Someone laughed nervously, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. Amara's lips parted, but words stumbled over one another before falling apart. Beneficiary? She finally managed. I don't understand. The lawyer nodded as if he had expected confusion. Perhaps you will once you've read his confession letter. He asked that it be delivered here, publicly. That word, publicly, changed the air. A murmur of excitement rushed through the diner. Cell phones discreetly tilted upward. Cameras began recording. The lawyer opened the briefcase again and drew out a white envelope, thicker than most, sealed in red wax. He broke it carefully and began to read. To Amara. You don't know me beyond the walls of this diner, but I have known your family longer than you could imagine. I was once a man of numbers and property, a banker who thought law and paper made me righteous. I was wrong. Many years ago, my signature helped steal a home from yours. I told myself it was just policy. I watched your grandfather beg for time, watched his eyes dim as I handed him the final notice. I destroyed his faith in justice with a stamp. He lost his home. Your family lost everything. I built a life on that foundation. For decades, I pretended the guilt would fade. It didn't. A sharp breath swept across the diner. Someone whispered, "Oh God," under their breath. Amara froze, her body numb, heart caving in on itself. The lawyer continued, "When I saw you here, serving coffee with kindness I did not deserve, I felt the weight of every sin return. You looked at me the way your grandfather once did, not with hate, but with humanity. You showed me mercy without knowing who I was. I knew then I couldn't die with this unspoken. This town buried what I did. They profited from it. I am leaving everything I own to you, Amara, not as charity, but as reparation. And I beg your forgiveness, though I know I do not deserve it." The lawyer's voice trembled ever so slightly as he folded the letter and placed it beside the brown envelope. The diner erupted. Voices collided, disbelief, anger, gossip, accusation. He left what to her? Someone hissed. "Is this some scam?" Another spat. A woman muttered, "Figures, always playing the victim card." And someone laughed, low, ugly, poisonous. Amara's vision blurred. She could feel eyes crawling over her like insects, dissecting her existence. Her hands shook as she tried to steady the envelope, but it slipped to the floor. Papers spilled, legal forms, signatures, notary stamps, property deeds, proof. The manager rushed forward, whispering her name, but she couldn't hear him. The sound around her had turned into a roar. People recording, whispering, accusing. One man near the back stood up, his face red with anger. "So she played him, huh? Waited till he was dying and took his money. That's what this is!" Her heart pounded. "That's not true," she wanted to say, but her voice refused to leave her lips. Another customer added, "These people always find a way to take from us." That word, "these people," landed like a hammer. Amara's stomach twisted. She had heard it all her life, sometimes whispered, sometimes joked, sometimes shouted. But now, in the place she worked, where she'd poured coffee and smiled through tired mornings, it came like a verdict. The lawyer raised his hands to quiet them, but the damage had already been done. The whispers grew teeth. Someone shouted, "It's all fake!" Another, "She's lying!" That old man was senile. Phones flashed. A woman live-streamed from her booth. The world was watching her humiliation in real time. Amara's hands clenched into fists. She wasn't sure whether to cry or run. Then the door burst open. An older woman stepped in, short, fierce, eyes blazing. Amara's mother. Somehow she had heard. Maybe someone called her. Maybe the town's gossip traveled faster than light. She marched forward, her voice trembling but strong. "Enough," she said. The words sliced through the chaos like thunder. The room quieted, but only slightly. She turned toward the lawyer. "Is it true?" He nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am." Every word. He confessed before witnesses. "This is all legally binding." The mother's eyes glistened. She looked at Amara, her daughter standing in the middle of strangers, shaking under the weight of a truth she never asked for. And then, slowly, she turned toward the crowd. "You all sat here eating food my daughter served you every day with kindness. You never saw her. You never cared to. But now that truth finally favors her. Suddenly it's too much. Suddenly she must have cheated, lied, manipulated. Her voice broke but kept rising. You talk about fairness, about hard work, yet when a black woman inherits what was stolen from her family, you call it a trick? The diner trembled under the weight of her fury. But the crowd didn't soften. Not all of them. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed. Others crossed their arms. Hardened, Amara stood frozen, tears streaming silently. Her mother's words slicing open decades of unspoken pain. And then, something happened that no one expected. One of the bodyguards stepped forward. Tall, dark-skinned, silent until now. He looked straight at the crowd and said quietly, "He knew what he did was wrong. He hired me last year not to protect his property, but to protect his conscience. He told me if something happens to me, make sure the truth reaches her safely, no matter what it costs." Gasps again. He turned to Amara. "He said your grandfather built furniture for his office once. That he broke that man's life to save his own reputation. He never forgave himself," the lawyer added softly. "His death wasn't sudden. He knew it was coming. He planned this months in advance. This is not a scam, Miss Amara. It's his confession to history." Tears rolled down Amara's cheeks. Her knees buckled and her mother caught her. The paper in her hands fluttered to the floor like feathers falling from a wounded bird. But the storm in the diner was far from over. Someone yelled, "Reparations? For what? None of us did anything." Another shouted back, "That's not the point!" Within seconds, voices clashed again. Decades of buried tension ripping open in a small-town diner that had pretended to be peaceful. The lawyer tried to control the chaos, but the mob had found its rhythm: anger, denial, fear. Injustice wasn't just a memory here. It was alive, clawing to stay relevant. Amara's breathing quickened. Her vision tunneled. All she could see were faces, angry. "Curious recording," her mother whispered. "We need to go." But as they turned, one of the men blocking the exit stepped forward, the same customer who had shouted earlier. "You think you can just walk out with our town's legacy?" He barked. "That old man was one of us. You tricked him." The word "tricked" burned hotter than the air around her. Amara raised her eyes to meet his, her voice low but steady. He tricked himself. He thought stealing from my family would never come back to him. But it did. It always does. Her voice quivered, but it carried something stronger: defiance. The man scoffed. "You people always make everything about race." Her mother's reply came like thunder. "Because it always was." The words hit like lightning, and silence followed, thick and trembling. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We're done here." He motioned for the guards to escort them. As they moved toward the door, someone threw a crumpled napkin that hit Amara's shoulder. Another muttered a slur she'd spent her life pretending not to hear. It wasn't the word itself that broke her. It was that no one stopped them. No one said enough this time. She walked out anyway, head high, tears burning but unfallen. Outside, the sky was darkening, heavy with storm clouds. Reporters had already gathered. Someone must have leaked it within minutes. Microphones thrust forward, flashes firing. "Amara, how does it feel to inherit from a white man who wronged your family? Do you believe justice was served? Are you keeping the money?" She said nothing. Her mother shielded her from the cameras, whispering, "Don't answer them. Let the truth speak on its own." But inside, the truth was not quiet. It screamed because justice didn't feel like justice. It felt like exposure. It felt like standing naked in front of a crowd that only saw her color, not her pain. They drove home in silence, the envelope resting on Amara's lap like a live thing. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then heavy, slamming against the windshield. When they reached their small apartment, Amara sat by the window and watched the storm flood the street. She could see the diner's neon sign flicker from across town, half lit, half dead, a perfect reflection of what the day had become. Her phone buzzed endlessly. Messages, calls, friend requests, strangers telling her what they thought of her, what she should do with the money, what she owed society now. She turned it off. Her mother came to her side, holding the letter again. "He gave you back what was stolen," she said softly. "But you have to decide what to do with it now." Amara nodded, staring out the window. The lightning flashed, illuminating her reflection. A woman who had spent her life invisible, now forced into the center of a storm she never wanted. She whispered, "They'll never see me as anything but a thief." Her mother's voice was steady. "Then show them what a thief of kindness can do." But Amara wasn't sure she had the strength left to fight. The town would twist the story, make her the villain. They already had. As thunder rolled across the sky, she closed her eyes and saw his face. The old man, sitting by the window, watching her with regret heavy in his gaze. Was his confession enough? Could a signature undo years of pain, humiliation, and systemic theft? She didn't know. But deep down, beneath the grief, beneath the rage, a spark flickered. Not forgiveness, not yet, but resolve. She picked up the papers from the envelope, now damp with tears. Her name, printed beside words she never thought would be hers. Owner. Her grandfather had died believing the world would never give back what it took. Now it had, but not because it wanted to. Because it couldn't hide anymore, Amara looked out at the rain, voice trembling but fierce. "They think this is over. It's just beginning." Lightning lit her face, a mix of sorrow and defiance. Behind her, thunder growled like an old ghost finally finding its voice. The past had been exposed. The town had seen the truth, and the storm was far from done. As dawn rises, the story will shift from this public breaking point toward emotional reconstruction. Amara confronting the aftermath. The media frenzy and the haunting question. Can truth heal when justice arrives too late? Would you like the resolution and impact section to end on a note of painful reflection, the cost of justice, or quiet hope and transformation, her reclaiming dignity and purpose? The storm didn't end that night, not the one outside nor the one inside her. For days, Amara's world existed in fragments, news headlines, social media posts, strangers' opinions about a story they only half understood. Her name trended for all the wrong reasons. Waitress inherits fortune from dying white man. Scam or miracle? Race, guilt, and money. America's endless debate. Each headline turned her into something she wasn't. To some, she was a con artist. To others, a symbol. To very few, a human being. Reporters waited outside the diner every morning, shouting questions she refused to answer. Customers came not to eat, but to see her, to watch, to whisper, to decide what they believed before she even spoke. Every smile she gave was dissected. Every silence became a statement. And through it all, Amara kept showing up. She still poured coffee. She still tied her apron. She still cleaned the same tables where people had called her a liar. But she no longer looked out the window waiting for someone who would never come. The old man's letter, his confession, had been read, recorded, and spread like wildfire. The town that once ignored her now lived in two halves, those who said justice was done, and those who said justice went too far. No one asked what justice felt like to her, because justice didn't feel like peace. It felt like exposure. It felt like the entire town staring into her life, not with empathy, but with entitlement, as if she owed them her emotions, her gratitude, her forgiveness, but inside her, something was changing, slowly, painfully. A week later, Amara stood at the edge of her grandfather's old property, the one her family had lost decades ago. The documents were clear. It now belonged to her. The house was long gone, replaced by an overgrown field. Grass had reclaimed what humans had stolen. Wind whispered through the trees, carrying echoes of everything unsaid. She knelt down and pressed her palm to the earth. For the first time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not by people, but by time itself. Her mother stood beside her, quiet, tears glistening in her eyes. "He would have been proud," she whispered. "Not of what you got, but of what you stood through." Amara didn't answer. She didn't have to, because she knew. This was bigger than property, bigger than a signature, bigger than one man's guilt trying to make peace with the grave. This was about everything taken without apology. Every humiliation disguised as misunderstanding. Every smile that hid pain. Every door closed before she even knocked. She realized then she could run from this story or she could own it. So she made a decision. The next day, she returned to the diner, not to work, but to speak. Word spread fast. By evening, the diner was full again. Cameras flashing, microphones waiting. Some came to see her fail. Others came hoping to see redemption. The air was heavy with expectation, the kind that tastes like electricity before lightning strikes. She stood in front of the same counter where she had once stood trembling, surrounded by whispers and hate. This time her hands were steady, her voice cut through the room. "I didn't ask for any of this," she began, "but I've learned that history doesn't need permission to find you. It will sooner or later." The room was silent. When I read his letter, I didn't feel proud. I felt broken, because what he did to my family wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a system built to make sure people like him always won. And people like me always had to smile through losing. A murmur of discomfort ran through the crowd. Guilt rarely sits quietly. I served him for months. I treated him like any other customer. I didn't know he was the man who took everything from my grandfather. I didn't know he carried that guilt until he died. But I do know this. Forgiveness without accountability isn't healing. It's just forgetting. She paused. The old neon light flickered above her, the same one that had buzzed during the confrontation days earlier. I'm not here to take revenge. I'm not here to make anyone hate him. But I'm not going to pretend that a single inheritance fixes decades of injustice. It doesn't. What he gave me wasn't money. It was a responsibility. She looked out at the crowd, at the faces she once served. So I'm using it to rebuild what my family lost, not for me, but for the next generation. I'm turning that land into a community center, a place where kids like me don't have to learn about dignity from struggle. The crowd was still, but something in the air shifted, from skepticism to uneasy respect. She continued, voice trembling but strong. Maybe that's how justice begins, not with anger, not with hate, but with the courage to build something good from something cruel. She lowered her gaze for a moment, took a breath. You can erase a house. You can't erase history, but you can decide what grows from it. And with that, she stepped down. No applause, no cheers, just silence, the kind that means people are thinking. Sometimes silence is the loudest kind of change. That night, as Amara locked the diner one last time, she noticed a letter taped to the door. It was from one of the regulars, a white woman who had once called her too sensitive. I was wrong. I didn't see what you went through. I didn't want to. But you made me look. Thank you for not giving up, Amara smiled faintly. The kind of smile that hurts because it carries both grief and grace. She walked home under a sky that was finally clear. The storm had passed, but the air was different now. Cleaner, charged with something new. Weeks passed. The media moved on, as it always does. The noise died down. But the echoes remained, in conversations at grocery stores, in sermons at churches, in the quiet reflections of people who could no longer claim ignorance. The diner eventually closed, replaced by a small plaque that read, "This was where a woman stood against silence." Amara's community center opened months later, built on the land her grandfather had lost. Kids played where injustice once stood. Laughter replaced shame. Hope replaced bitterness. And though not everyone in town supported her, more people began to. Small gestures appeared. A donation, a kind word, a neighbor dropping by to help paint the walls. Change didn't arrive in speeches or parades. It arrived in hands, in effort, in accountability. Still, not every heart softened. There were those who refused to let go of their hate, those who saw her success as an accusation. And maybe, in a way, it was. Because her very existence, her refusal to be broken, was defiance. But Amara didn't need their approval anymore. She had outgrown it. One evening, months later, she stood outside the center at sunset, watching children run across the grass where her grandfather's porch used to be. She could almost hear his voice, steady, proud, saying, "You brought light back to where they left darkness." She smiled through tears. In her heart, forgiveness and justice no longer felt like opposites. They felt like two sides of the same wound, both necessary, both painful, both healing in their own way. Still, some nights, the weight of it all pressed on her chest. The hate she faced, the whispers, the endless explaining of pain to people who never had to justify theirs. She'd sit by her window and stare at the moon, remembering the old man's face, the guilt in his eyes, the way his hands trembled on the coffee cup. She didn't hate him, not anymore, because hate would have meant carrying him forever. Forgiveness, though, forgiveness meant letting go without forgetting. She whispered into the quiet, "You did one right thing before you left. Now let me do the rest." And somewhere in that stillness, she felt peace. Not because the past was fixed, but because she had learned how to live beyond it. Her story began as one woman's tragedy, but it became a mirror, reflecting something bigger, something uncomfortable. Because for every Amara, there are thousands unseen, people carrying the weight of histories they didn't choose, fighting systems they didn't build, facing judgments before they even speak. They are told to forgive without being heard, to move on without justice, to stay quiet so others don't feel guilty. But silence never built anything. Silence never healed anyone. Her story reminds us that racism isn't always loud. It often hides behind smiles, paperwork, and polite conversations. It exists in what's ignored, not just in what's said. And every act of kindness, every moment of courage, every refusal to stay invisible, those are rebellions in themselves. As the years passed, people forgot the headlines, but they remembered her center. Children grew up hearing her name, not as a victim, but as a builder, the woman who turned pain into purpose. And yet, she never stopped reminding them that what happened wasn't a fairy tale. It was a reckoning. She would tell them, "Justice isn't a gift, it's a debt being paid, and it's far from settled." Some nights, she'd look out at the mural painted on the center's wall, a young black girl standing tall beneath storm clouds, holding a single key. Underneath it read, "Our history is not our shame, it's our proof." Years later, on the anniversary of the old man's death, Amara returned to the diner's remains, now a parking lot, forgotten by time. She placed a single coffee cup on the asphalt and whispered, "I forgive you." Not because he deserved it, but because she refused to let his wrongs define her strength. Rain began to fall softly, just as it had the day everything changed. And as she walked away, the cup slowly filled, not with bitterness, but with water that caught the reflection of the sky. The story didn't end with the money, or the land, or even her victory. It ended, and began again, with one simple truth. Healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about refusing to let the past erase you. Somewhere in America, another, Amara stands behind another counter, smiling through the same kind of silence. Maybe she doesn't know it yet. But her story matters too. Because the fight against racism doesn't live in courts or headlines. It lives in the quiet courage of ordinary people who keep showing up. People who refuse to be invisible. So when you see injustice, don't look away. When you hear hate, don't stay silent. And when someone tells you their story, listen. Because sometimes, listening is the first act of justice. They stole her home, her history, her peace. And she built something unbreakable from the ruins. So ask yourself, how many more Amaras must carry the weight of silence before the world finally changes?